If there's one thing I've learned, it's that getting outside is always worth it, no matter the weather. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're building a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! Hey humans! As the temperatures dip outside for most of us and the days parade towards winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, we're also well into the season of holiday busyness. Here at Humans Outside, that means one podcast season is over and we're getting ready for season 5, which will launch in January 2022. But I just love this in-between time because it's a chance to bring you podcast guests again that I just loved or found really useful. Topping that list is this episode with Mollie Foster, a guide up here in Alaska who walked us through an incredibly practical tutorial on how to dress for cold weather. I know this is an important topic for everyone, and by everyone I mean especially me, as it's been below zero here for several weeks. Yeah, like negative temperatures, below zero. It's been very, very cold. I hope you find this episode useful and enjoyable. And of course, we will be back with new episodes in early January. As you get ready for the holidays and to reset yourself for the new year, I want to make sure you know about something new I just launched at humansoutside.com, Humans Outside Challenge Kits. These kits are designed by me for you to give you a little extra oomph for heading outside daily. I've got 3 kits, depending on what level you're interested in, filled with exclusive content for challenge users only. You don't want to miss this. Check them out on humansoutside.com, and because you're a podcast listener, you could get an extra 10% off through December by using coupon code PODCASTFAN, all one word, PODCASTFAN, at checkout. Okay, so enough of that. Here's our episode from late 2020 with Mollie Foster on how to dress for cold weather. Enjoy! It's a question I get from listeners a lot. What should I wear to go outside? Insert specific weather here. And I love this question. I love it because it comes from people who are trying something new and aren't sure how to get started. I love it because it's a question every single person who has ever had an outdoor adventure has wondered at some point. I love it because it's a question I have personally had many times, and even a question I still have now, particularly when I'm trying something new. My top goal this podcast season was to drum up an expert to talk to us about this subject. But I didn't want a person representing a clothing company, although you know I'm fond of certain brands. And I didn't want one of my superhuman winter running friends, although we know that they know what to wear in 100 miles in Alaska in the winter. I wanted to bring someone normal, a regular human who is an expert in getting outside and helping others get outside. A normal human who is also an amazing helper. And that is why I'm so excited to bring you the amazing Mollie Foster today. Like many people here in Alaska, Mollie isn't from here. But for the last several years, her guide company, Traverse Alaska, has helped all sorts of people get outside in all kinds of weather. She's learned how to dress herself to go outside, and she's learned how to help others do the same. She's also the author of the guidebook, Hiking Alaska, which, as a writer myself, I think is pretty cool. And if you think her voice sounds familiar, it's because Mollie is also the sister of one of my favorite people and so-called running wives, Claire Shea. Mollie, welcome, and thanks so much for joining me on the Humans Outside podcast today.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, so we start all of our podcast episodes imagining ourselves in our guest's favorite outdoor space. Where are we with you today?
Oh man, this is such a hard question, and I've had this question in reference to my guidebook that has 100 different hiking trails around the state. It's like, which is your favorite? And it's impossible for me to answer. But I would say that one of my favorite places and a place that I call home is Denali. So it's one of the first places in 2009 when I moved to Alaska where I spent a summer, and now my husband and I have a cabin there and I spend quite a bit of time. So I would say, I mean, year round being up there, just watching the seasons change and really growing to love winter. Like, I really like this topic a lot, and especially now, because the flip side is I grew up in Michigan and hated winter. Didn't like winter at all. And so now I really have grown to love it and appreciate it, thanks to the Alaska culture and whatnot. So it's a super special long season.
Awesome. So you're from Michigan. Okay. But how did you end up here in Alaska, and what led you to become an Alaska-based guide?
Yeah, so in 2009, I had visited Alaska once before. My sister, you mentioned, Claire, lived in southeastern Sitka. And so I spent a week there when I was in college. Really thought Alaska's cool. I would like to go work up there for a summer, someday. And so I was living in Colorado at the time in 2009, and was able to talk my sister into helping me get a photography job up in Denali. And so I moved up there for just one summer, as a common story for especially seasonal places like Denali, and pretty much stayed since, and met my now husband that summer and just didn't look back. I mean, it's the landscape. It's definitely a big part of what drew me up here. Having family is really awesome, but the community and the people that I've met here, it was just like, these are my people, So
yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, and going back to Colorado, I don't know if you've heard this before, but a friend from up here calls it Crowderado. But it did feel like that when I went back to visit, and I was like, Alaska's ruined me. It's, this is just home now.
So what's the difference between getting outside here and getting outside in Michigan that made you like this version of doing winter and dressing for cold weather better?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's just the celebration of winter that I've experienced up here in Alaska. And of course, there's just a variety of activities outside that people do here. Whereas in Michigan, and again, I was only in Michigan growing up until I finished high school. And so, you're at a different point in your life. But Michigan winters to me were just gray and cold and not full of a lot of winter activities that I liked at the time. But now I've really grown to love skiing, skate skiing, cross country skiing, downhill skiing. I'm still working at improving my skiing skills, but I really love it. And as well as things like dog mushing. I have a lot of friends who are big dog mushers who that's their full-time gig, running 1,000-mile races across Alaska. So I've learned a lot from those folks, and ice skating, ice bowling, you name it. I mean, there's just so many activities. What I tell to visitors, like for our guiding company, when they're like, what's winter like here if they're visiting in the summer? I say, summer's great. We generally stick to these trails or, these areas where we can go up in the alpine and whatnot. And in the winter, when the temperatures freeze all of these ponds and rivers, I spend a lot of time in the interior. So like literally everything freezes over. And so our whole playground just opens up. Like I go to all sorts of different distant areas, like in Denali in the winter, that in the summer would just be a slog through swamps and things like that to get to. So I think that part in particular is really kind of flipped the switch for me. Whereas in Michigan, say in the city, when it snowed or when, winter came, it was like it slowed life down. You have to plow the streets and this and that, and it took longer to get places. It was kind of a pain. But here it's like we need those freezing temperatures and that snow and whatnot for all the activities that we Alaskans love to do.
Yeah, but I want to go back to something you just said a couple seconds ago, because even though we're going to get really practical here in just a minute, I love what you just said about attitude, because that's what you're describing, right? You're describing the difference between here and Michigan as largely being your perspective on how you're going to handle the winter time, and that you here are looking at it in terms of opportunity, and in Michigan you were looking at it in terms of inconvenience. And
in a lot of that's maturity, right? You're older now, we're adults, things you see differently when you're an adult versus when you're a high schooler. But at the same time, I think a lot of people who are just learning to be outdoorsy are learning that this is a matter of perspective, and that how you handle getting outside is about wanting to, and then choosing to overcome that, and then choosing to find something that you love to do outside, no matter the weather. What do you think?
Oh yeah, no, you nailed it for sure. I couldn't agree more. I mean, like I was saying, it's the perspective and the mindset for so many Alaskans, and I learn a lot from people who homesteaded, like in the Denali area. People that homesteaded, they just get out and do it. Yeah, it might be 40 below, 30 below, whatever the temperatures are, but you never know until you just start trying and you figure out, as we're going to talk about, like what gear to wear, what you need to be able to survive outside at those extreme cold temperatures. And in the South Central area, it's typically not that cold, like say 40 below. But I have learned as well that, and maybe we'll talk more about this, but the wet and the dry cold, that really is a true thing. It is not equivalent. An Anchorage below zero and Denali below zero, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm so excited to get cracking. Quick caveat, because a lot of people don't, as you know, are listening to this outside of Alaska. So I want to make sure everybody understands that we are not standing here saying that, if you're not hanging at -40, you're not cool enough for this show, because that's not true. So I just want listeners to know that we're going to talk about how to dress in the weather. Cold is relative to you and how you experience it. So if you're in Texas and you're listening to this thinking, I have no room to stand on here, it might be 40 degrees one day. Chilly. Listen, this is for you as well. And we're going to talk about dress layering and all that good stuff. So let's get going. I'm excited. Okay, Mollie. Here we go. What's the first advice you give to folks for how to dress for the cold? First thing.
Yeah, I get this question a lot. We have visitors that come up in the winter for our guiding business, Traverse Alaska, and really the points that I hit are that the underlayers are very important when you're talking winter temperatures. And yeah, you nailed it. Like from that could be 37 degrees above to the opposite, below zero. Really, just those underlayers. So no cotton. Definitely don't want to wear cotton, because then when it gets wet, it'll stay wet and you just get really cold. So layers like merino wool, long johns, and next to skin layers are super important. And then basically it's layering on top of that. And then I talk with folks about fingers and toes. It's all about fingers and toes after that. And for me, as we'll talk about, fingers, are a very special need for me, and I think for you as well, to be able to keep your fingers happy. And if you're warm and dry enough and you're outside, like, you're going to just enjoy yourself a lot more. I think talking back to growing up and not really enjoying Michigan winters, I hate to harp on Michigan so much, but on the winters, I think I probably didn't know I definitely didn't know the things that I know now in terms of layering and whatnot. And so I was probably just chilly a lot and not wearing the proper gear, as well as all these other factors that we're talking about.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So we're saying it's about what you have on, but it's also about how you're layering it on top of each other. That no voodoo magic is going to save you if you don't understand, like, at the very basic, no cotton. So like wicking fabrics and wearing layers. So you might have on like a pair of long johns and then a pair of like pants over top of that, and then maybe even a pair of pants on top of that, depends what you're doing. And then on top you could, you've got if you're a woman, you've got a bra or sports bra on of some kind, again, wicking, and then layer on top of that, and then go from there. And then how many layers you're wearing is really dependent on just how cold we're talking about, right?
Yeah, how cold, and then also if you're moving or not. So most of the time when I was preparing for this, I was like, well, most of the time that I'm outside, I'm moving. And just recently went on a hunt. I haven't hunted much before, one of my first hunts in Southeast Alaska, and prepared for like 37 degrees and raining, which is what we had a lot of the time. And yeah, it's very important. Like with the hunting, something I hadn't experienced before was that we were moving and then we were just sitting for like hours. So also having those layers that you can keep in your backpack and throw on. So definitely that part's important. Whether when you're preparing for going outside, yeah, are you going to be moving the whole time? If you're going to be running, if you're going to be exerting yourself quite a bit, like you don't really need that many layers, as it turns out, as you experiment and learn. Whereas, yeah, flip side is if you're sitting, then yes, maybe you do need more, those same layers as you described, and then bigger outer layers and things like that.
Yeah, but you want to have this stuff on hand, and you want to remember that that you might need it, and that you're going to figure out what you personally need to wear in different temperatures over time. But starting with having just an idea that it's the layering that makes a difference is important. It's so funny, when we moved here, I didn't I mean, you don't know what you don't know. I didn't know about layering. Like, we lived in Tennessee. When I look back at I have this pair of gloves that I have worn as a like a liner glove now under my mittens one time. Okay. Since we moved here, that I wore on, like, that's what I wore for running on the very coldest days in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Okay. Like these fleece lined Nike running gloves. Mm-hmm. All right. And I keep them, just in case, but I'm probably never going to wear them again. And I wore, so coldest days, we're talking tights, socks, a long sleeve shirt, maybe a 3/4 zip, like dry fit, sort of wicking pullover, this tiny little hat that I can't wear here because it doesn't really cover my ears, and those gloves. That's it. That's like the freezingest day. And I think I've worn that 3/4 zip here in Alaska one time in the fall. Like,
yeah,
I haven't worn it since. Right. So my point is like that it just depends where you are. But if you start with knowing that you can wear a lot of clothes at one time, just layer, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And that hunting trip that I was describing, which was just earlier this month, we had a transition lake where we would just, like, it was like totally changed from climbing the mountain to this area. And then the next zone was going to be like a little slower pace, maybe even sitting for hours, things like that. So I went from maybe even a t-shirt or long sleeve on top and just hiking pants to layering up, maybe putting on long johns, putting on rubber rain gear, and lots of layers on top, on top. And then I wore my, what I call emergency mittens, because it was like high 30s and raining with Gore-Tex liners on the outside. So it's, it's not one for fashion, but hey, I was comfortable.
Yeah. Well, that's the other, like, I think I posted a picture not long ago of my high Alaska fashion, right? And I had a bunch of layers on. That's what the picture was, like my hobo, color coordinated, not layer situation. But that's what it was. I had tights, I had boots, I had socks, I got my skirt, I had a vest, it's like ridiculous looking, but I was comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you're right. We're not always the most fashionable looking people, but we are warmer than the other guy. So
exactly.
So that's what matters. So how do you know how many, is it experiment? How do you know how many layers to wear?
Yeah, that's tough to say. It just depends. There's a lot of variables, but I definitely experiment. And for folks that are like just trying to dip their toes for going outside, I would start with like little walks out your front door and whatnot at those different temperatures. And then you'll figure out, as we're talking about, like what you need, because it varies so much from person to person. And like I have in my head, if, I'm going on a adventure and it's going to be 30s and raining and wet, I have a whole quiver of, say, gloves and gear that I pick from for that. And then I have the drier cold in interior Alaska, where it can be pretty extreme temperatures. I have the layers in my mind of like approximately what I need, and then you just adjust from there.
So you've now mentioned dry versus wet cold twice. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between that? Like, how do people know what that means, and then also what is the difference between how you get dressed in that? Do you wear more for wet cold than for dry cold?
Yeah, good question. So, and the reason why I think about this so much is because I split my time between Anchorage, which is for folks out of Alaska. It's right along the water, so it's a more wet climate, and especially when you're talking for winter, like the temperatures range from 15 below zero would be pretty darn cold for here, and then it up to closer to freezing. And then Denali, which is a interior Alaska in the mountains, a little bit higher elevation, very dry climate, where temperatures are usually lower on the scale, but it is that dry, wet, cold. So I've gone between the two locations frequently, wearing the same gear, and I've gone from like 30 below in Denali to downtown Anchorage, where it's slightly breezy and zero, and been wearing the same gear and been a little bit. It's like the wet cold is like little bone chilling. Like it feels like it kind of cuts through a little more than the dry cold, if that makes sense. And I'm no meteorologist, obviously, to be able to describe the differences, but basically just that like high mountain dry air, or the more the like maritime wet climate difference. And across the lower 48, of course, there's areas that are going to be drier or wetter colds.
Yeah, I find that to be true as well. And maybe final thought just on the overall layer subject, just sort of overarching, is that my other mistake when I moved somewhere cold was that I thought that I only need one jacket. Like, hello, I have a jacket. Why do I need, like, first of all, if you own like more than 4 jackets of different varieties, you own too many jackets. That was not true, by the way. Also, you have a jacket. Why do you need all these other clothes? But the truth of the matter is, if you live somewhere where it's below freezing, really, you need your jacket, and then you probably have layers under that jacket. And how utilitarian the jacket is based off of its warmth to start with, how cold it is where you live, but also how many layers you're putting on underneath it. And so all jackets are not made equal. And you probably, depending again where you live, might need more than one variety. And I'm ashamed to say that it took me way too many years to buy the really warm jacket that I should have bought the first year. Instead, I tried to be the person who didn't have too much stuff, and I was cold. The end. So
and miserable.
And miserable. And now I am warm and wearing a jacket that looks like a sleeping bag. And it was not cheap, but I will probably wear it until I die. I mean, you're going to have to peel me out of it because it's expensive and I like it. So.
Hey humans, just a quick break to ask for a huge favor. If you're loving this episode, could you take a second to give us 5 stars or a great rating and review in whatever podcast platform you use? Those ratings help other humans find the podcast too and spread that humans outside love around the world. I can't thank you enough for listening and sharing your support through a rating and review. Now, back to the episode.
Let's talk about other layers, because I think there are a couple things that people don't think about. Vests. All right. We make fun of the people in the Great Northwest for their fleece vests, but I think they might have something going there. What do you think about vests?
Well, I own many vests, so I am a big fan. And thinking about vests, I have like my super big down vest that's for when it's really cold. And then I've got like my medium winter where I'm like maybe hanging out inside, maybe outside. And then I have my lighter vest that's more I wear that pretty much all the time under all the different layers. One side note before I forget, in terms of layers that I love and have been preaching to my friends about, is just a nice thin wind layer. So wind layer that cuts the wind, but then also is breathable. So for years and years and years, I just had Gore-Tex, hard shell jacket for rain, right? So for those rainy days, keeps the water off you. That's great. But then what about when it's just a little bit breezy or really windy, and you're moving, you're running or hiking or skiing or whatever. And so I just recently, just like a year or so ago, after watching my husband wear his all the time, I was like, I should get one of those. And I got like Outdoor Research has one, Patagonia has one. They all have different styles, but like the Patagonia Houdini, for example, is one that that I really like, and it cuts the wind and also is breathable so you don't sweat. And that's been a layer. That's been one of my go-to layers as of the last couple of years for like year round. So
yeah. Yeah. And of course you could then put that, if you needed to, you could put a warmer layer on top of that, right?
yeah.
Or the glorious vest underneath it.
Yeah, definitely. In any order. So the fashion is definitely last, but function is there. But yeah, my husband and I kind of have a joke. So he's like, how many wind layers do you have on today, Molly? Because I'll have like that breathable wind layer and then maybe a harder shell on top. So, but going back to your original question, vests for sure. Vests are amazing. And you can wear them under layers and then wear jackets on top, or you can rock wearing a long sleeve jacket and then a vest on top. I know a lot of people who do that, especially thinking of some musher friends, dog mushers, people that run sled dogs. Yeah, where they are, in my mind, people who have been here and spent time in those cold temperatures and do it day and night, year round, 24/7. They learn a lot. So I usually watch what they're doing, ask them lots of questions, and use that for my own gear.
And the reason a vest works really well is because it's keeping your core warm, which is of course where your heart is and where all your blood comes from, and other very minor things like that, right? Like that's the physiological reason that it helps, right?
Exactly. Yep. It just keeps your core warm, and if your core is warm, usually you're overall warm. Fingers and toes for myself, and I think for you maybe as well. It takes a little longer to get to, but yeah, a vest will keep your core warm, which is very important.
I even keep a fleece vest in the wintertime next to my desk in my office, because my desk is in front of a window and sometimes it can get a little chilly there. And I find that if I throw on this vest, I don't have to put on a sweatshirt or, go find a jacket or whatever. I can throw this vest on and I am, it's like the perfect combo, right? Because now I'm not sweating because my arms aren't too warm, but it just warms me right up. I'm a big fan, and I used to be the person who made fun of the fleece vest wearers at the Pacific Northwest. So count me in for doing a lot of confessions on this podcast episode. I guess it's like Amy's cold confessions. Okay. Okay. Another layer that I think that people don't necessarily understand as an option is the skirt. It's like a blanket for your legs. And I had never seen anyone wear this outside of Alaska, although I admit I haven't spent a lot of time in cold, snowy places outside of Alaska. Is a skirt a widely known option, or are we just that cool here?
We're pretty cool in Alaska. We set our own fashion that is distinct from the rest, it seems like. But yeah, I agree. A lot of visitors folks that we have that come up here to Alaska in the wintertime notice and comment on those vests, and then they try them themselves. And it's similar to what you were describing with that vest, where it's like, ooh, my butt can be warm, and I can like your whole, like your over your pants are warm because it's down skirt. They make them in a variety. It's like there's the short version if you're running or you're moving, biking, and then there's a longer version that is basically like a sleeping bag around your legs. And yeah, it took me a couple years living in Alaska to get into it, because I was like, I don't know. And then I tried it on and I was like, I need one of these. And now I actually throw it in as like an emergency gear, if I'm going backcountry skiing or things like that. We've talked to friends about, in terms of wilderness responsiveness, if something were to happen, it's like you've got this almost like a sleeping bag that packs down really small because they're down or synthetic.
Okay, so you have mentioned down and synthetic a couple times, and then you also mentioned soft shell and hard shell. Can you break those terms down for us?
Yeah, so down and synthetic, down being really, really compacts, very small, is the pro for down, and it's super warm, obviously. But the con is that if it gets wet, then like totally saturated, like a down sleeping bag gets wet, it's not warm anymore. Whereas synthetic is the flip side, where if it does get wet, it'll still keep you warm. It doesn't pack down as small as down, but it is comparable. And yeah, lots of jackets come in down or synthetic, sleeping bags, lots of different equipment and gear that come in both of those. And then hard shell and soft shell, referring to most commonly like jackets, but also pants. So hard shell is like Gore-Tex material, or depending on the brand, they may have their own type of Gore-Tex water repellent, like to be waterproof. And it, obviously if it's raining or things like that, it'll repel that water. Whereas a soft shell is, it's a little bit more moldable, like it's easier to move in the soft shell gear, but if it gets saturated, it's not necessarily going to repel the water in that same way. Yeah, is that
yeah, absolutely. I just no, that's perfect. And I think it's hard to I don't want to assume people know the differences between those things or what they're looking for, but yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a great breakdown to me. And I own I think I have one down jacket and a down vest, and then everything else I have is synthetic, and that does the trick for me. It's also easier to wash the synthetic, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not as tricky to launder. And I like clean laundry. So
yeah,
what can I say?
Yeah, totally.
And another thing I own in synthetic instead of down that my friends have in down is the puffy pants. Are you familiar with the glory of the puffy pants?
Oh yeah, puffy pants are amazing. Yeah, so super warm. Yours are down or synthetic?
Mine are the Mountain Hardwear synthetic.
Yeah, those are great. I have the same ones. Just got them added to the gear closet a couple years ago, and yeah, you can find me wearing those pretty much any time in the winter, especially if I'm hanging out outside, but also really comfortable inside. In our cabin in Denali, it's like it's a dry cabin, so I'm going outside quite a bit. That's we're going outside to use a bathroom and things like that, and so why not wear down pants and be comfortable? But yeah, similar to the skirt that I was describing, the down skirt situation, it's also worth throwing those down pants in the backpack on an adventure, because I use the word emergency and just like emergency gloves, emergency pants, but it's just when you're super cold, it's just really nice to have those layers that you can throw on if you're at the top of a mountain, or you're just on a neighborhood park or wherever, and if you get a little chilly.
Absolutely. There's I'm happy to announce to our podcast listeners that Claire has recently bought the pants. So this has been a subject of long discussion here on the Humans Outside podcast, the pants, capital T, capital P. They have a title.
Yeah, and so something else to add as well is when I'm thinking of when I'm wearing my down pants, a lot of times if I'm inside or in a cabin or whatever, I'm also wearing down booties, like around my feet. So I don't know if those are in your gear closet, but they're really nice. They're like having a sleeping bag around your feet.
They are not, but they might be on my Christmas list now.
They're amazing. Yeah. And when I've gone on like longer winter camping trips, which I never thought I would say, going back to like growing up, not loving winter, I've done that in interior in the Arctic, and having the down booties are like essential camp shoes, and I'll even sleep with them on, like in my sleeping bag if it's really cold. And then you're going outside to do your business and whatnot, and like cook and things like that, and you just keep wearing the down booties, because it's like that, or your ski boots, or whatever your mode of travel
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about hands and feet, because this is like my biggest problem, and I know you have a problem with this too. So I think you do too, have a condition known as Raynaud's, which is, and I think a lot of people have it and don't know they have it, but without reason, so it would seem at times, my hands and feet get very, very cold, or just one finger gets cold weirdly, and it's basically turns yellow, and you look at your hands like, what the crap is happening now? And it happens it seems to happen to me at very specific temperatures or humidities. Everyone experiences this a little bit differently. I've noticed it especially happens if my arms are cold or my wrists are cold. I have to be just very careful and vigilant to be always keeping my mittens and such handy when it's cold outside, because my circulation is bad. Again, I think most people probably just recognize this as my circulation's not great. What do you think?
Yeah, hearing you talk about that, I'm shaking my head. Like I feel you. I get you. I have not been diagnosed with Raynaud's, but chilblains. Have you heard of this, Amy? And so chilblains, which is it's similar, but it's like not as advanced as Raynaud's, if that makes sense. So it's basically an abnormal blood vessel response to the cold. So yes, just poor circulation, in other words. And yeah, for me, my hands for sure number one, and then toes. Like my feet aren't usually as bad, or I've just kind of started to ignore them because maybe my hands are like screaming at me. But yeah, I basically when I go out on adventures, I just end up having a whole number of gloves from liners, like merino wool liners, to down mittens, and then like a hard shell liner on top of that. That's like my emergency glove situation that I can wear to like below 0 temperatures. And then like when I'm in a wet climate where if it's going to be rainy and closer to freezing, I've been wearing neoprene, like thick neoprene gloves. And that's been really helpful. So like when you know you're just going to get saturated by the rain or whatnot, then it'll still keep your hands warm. Now it's so a couple of things. And the key for me thinking about this, those chemical heat packs, do you ever use those?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those,
I was just about to say.
yeah, those I stick into gloves like majority of the time when I'm wearing gloves. And
yeah, me too.
When I go to the store, it's almost like I have a reflex where I have to buy them because it's like it's just a safety net for me to have those around and in every backpack and in every jacket or whatever, just to have them.
Yeah.
So they're little chemical heat packs that when you open them up out of the packet, they'll start to warm up, and you throw them in your mittens and they help get really warm pretty quickly. And you can actually so the ones that I buy, like they're up to 8 hours, they say, on it, and you can actually use it more than once. So like a lot of people, you open them, use it once, throw it away, or burn it. But you can put it in a Ziploc or some way to cut off the air, and then you can reuse them. They don't work.
Oh man, I did not know that.
They don't work quite as well, but like it's a good. The battery is not at 100%, but the battery is at 50 or 60%. So that's kind of cool to know. And those things are awesome. I also purchased the battery powered gloves. Like Outdoor Research came out with them, I think, first. Have you heard about those?
What do you think about those?
And
I've heard, but I do not own. So tell me.
Yeah, I have them, and I actually haven't worn them as much as I expected, mostly because it's like, oh, I forgot to charge them, like just another thing to charge, And so it's a rechargeable battery. You just plug in the battery, which is great and convenient. And then also when I want to use them, a lot of times it's below 0, and I've found that they don't really work that well at I think about 20 below. The battery just kind of dies because the battery's on the glove. But I'm thinking about reaching out to OR specifically and saying, hey, you guys want to use me as a guinea pig, and how about we make them so the battery, I can keep them in my pockets, because I know from shooting photos, it's like I always keep batteries in my pocket closer to my core to stay warm, so they don't die in those colder temperatures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I want to go back to 2 things you said. One, you mentioned liner gloves, and I mentioned earlier, most people, like in most of the U.S., are going to hear that phrase and not know what that means. Envision the gloves you buy at the drugstore, or just maybe even what you typically think of as gloves wherever you live, especially if you live in the South, like those little cotton gloves that you might buy at Target, or anything that's sold as like a running glove, like a lightweight running glove would be you could consider that a liner glove. And I wear them. I wear actually the Brooks lightweight running gloves under my mittens because while my hands get very cold, my hands also get very sweaty for reasons I cannot explain, like what is happening here. but it's, that happens. So the liner gloves helps with that because these running gloves are made with that wicking material that takes that sweat away from my hand, right? And then my down mittens, which I cannot wash, do not get weird smelling because I'm wearing liner gloves that are absorbing that sweat instead of making my mittens stinky. If you've ever smelled hockey gear, that's an example of people who cannot wash their stuff. We don't want to be those people. So
yeah,
we do not need that smell in our mittens. And then the second thing you mentioned, of course, was the hand warmers. They're sold under the brand Little Hotties, or you might just see called a hand warmer. And those are those chemical packs you mentioned. And the thing I like to remind people about these is that there is no shame in using them. I spent our first couple of years being like, it's not cold enough for me to use hand warmers. I don't need that. That's for when it's really cold. Well, first of all, what does really cold mean? And second of all, I'm an idiot. I should have been using them the whole time. I now keep them in my car year round. I, without shame, will bust them out. Sounds like you. Oh, it's a little chilly. Time for some hand warmers. It's just not worth it for me to get my hands cold. Because I have such a hard time warming them up again, that I would much rather start with them warm and quote unquote waste a thing of hand warmers if that's what it comes down to. It's worth it to me to have that. Okay. So feet. What do we do about our cold little tootsies? How do you know what boots to buy? What's going to be warm, and what socks do you wear? Is the thicker the better? Is it material? What do we do?
Yeah, good question. So before I talk about the materials, they also make hot hands and they also make hot feet. So the little chemical packs, they also make for your feet. So and they have a adhesive to it. So I'll put them when I'm putting my ski boots on, for example, I'll stick it on my toes and it'll keep that area warm. So those are awesome as well. In terms of socks and boots, what to wear in the wintertime, definitely same as what we've been talking about. It's all about the materials, what materials, non-cotton are going to be best because it's going to wick away the sweat when you start to sweat or that moisture. And so I mean, my sister makes fun of me because I am dressed head to toe in merino wool very often. And so definitely socks, merino wool. I have a lot of merino wool or regular wool or just any sort of wicking material. And then for boots, I've accumulated over the years living and spending winters in Alaska and spending winters in different climates and different temperatures within this huge state. Everything from rubber boots like the extra toughs that are pretty iconic in Alaska that are great for when it's raining. I have an insulated pair of extra toughs that I wear pretty much in the winter, like in Anchorage if the temperatures aren't too cold. And then when I go north to more interior temperatures, I have a pair of mucklucks, which are made in Ely, Minnesota, another similar climate. And they are moose hide. They're made from moose hide and have wool liners. And I just want to talk a little bit about intuition liners. And this is getting kind of techie and whatnot, but they come in a lot of ski boots, but those are pretty amazing because and I'm not a super big gearhead, I swear, but to talk about the technology, but I've just seen a lot of folks use those and I use them myself, the intuition liners, because they're a closed cell foam liner, and so it'll keep your feet warm even if they get wet, actually. So they're in my ski boots, and if we're crossing a river or something and they get wet, you can actually just dump the water out and keep moving, and they'll stay relatively warm. So long story short, it's all about the materials and the technology. I don't really have a general this is the boot for the winter, because it really does just depend on what the temperatures are doing, what kind of climate you're in, and even layering. I'll even layer with socks. Have a little thin liner and then wool, like a thicker wool sock, and then my boots, and maybe some little hot toes or little hottie, if it's really cold. Yeah.
Well, it depends what you're doing too. Like if I'm out hiking, I'm going to wear a different winter boot than I am if I'm going for a walk in the woods behind my house or even down the street. Here where I live, ice is a big concern. It gets very, very icy here in the Matsu Valley. In fact, we have ice fog right now. It's fog that's so cold that it's leaving ice all over everything, right? So it sounds very ominous, but it looks really cool. So I really like a boot just in general for like general outside stuff this time of year that has a good grip on it. So I'm not going to fall on my butt while I'm walking around, right? So I adore my Ice Bug boots that they're actually a Michelin rubber sole that grips the ground really well. It's the same thing that's like used in tires. They're not studded because I like to be able to wear them in stores and wear them all the time. But boots are great to buy because they people who sell them rate them. So like the companies that make them have a rating on them for how cold it's supposed to be able to wear them to. And so I find that if I buy a boot that's rated to well below 0, I'm good to go almost all the time for just normal outdoor walks and just casual outdoor stuff in the wintertime. And then of course, if I'm out running or whatever, I'm wearing a much different shoe than that particular boot. I also really like to have a boot on that is easy to get on and off because I am, trying to just go for a walk during the day, like just get outside a little bit. Right. But I don't, the thing that drives me insane in the wintertime compared to the rest of the year is how much work it is to go outside. Like I have to find all of this stuff and then I have to stop and put it all on. And then when I come home, I have to take it all off. And that just drives me crazy. And so having things that are easy to get on and off are really important to me, just as a sort of casual, like I'm not mountain climbing, just trying to go for a walk here, guys.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And they make insulated hiking boots that I would think like if I lived in the lower 48, I would probably wear those and just rock those all winter. And then, whether they're laced or maybe a version that's a slip on, because I totally agree with you. It's really nice to be able to just slip things on and off when you have so many layers that you're dealing with in the winter time, and just makes it more realistic where you're like, okay, slip these on, go on a walk or go on a hike or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we're running out of time. I want to talk about kids here just in a second, but I think we've passed by the opportunity to talk about the buff, the workhorse of outdoor gear, the face buff. So people wear it as I always call it baklava, which is not the right word, by the way. Balaclava. You can wear it as that. You can wear it on your neck. You can wear it around your head. You wear it on your ears, whatever, right? Do you love a good buff, or are you just like, who needs them?
Definitely. I wear, I have like a whole bunch of buffs and wear them, around my neck. It's funny when I don't have a buff on, I'll wear it just under my chin and on my neck, and my neck will be cold, which I didn't ever think I would be admitting. But and then you if I'm skiing or I'm hiking or walking or whatever, and I'm wearing a beanie, a hat, and then I get warm, I'll take that beanie off. Maybe I have a hood that I'll wear, but maybe I'll throw that buff from my neck. I'll move it up to over my ears and, kind of keep your head warm, but it's like open in the back. So you're wearing it like a headband so that you can still, because it's a lot of your temperature regulating is about, it's beyond fingers and toes, which we are, very passionate about. Obviously, I feel like we should have a whole episode on just our hands, but it's about your head, of course, and keeping it covered to keep you warm. And I've really learned over the years, spending a lot, weeks outside, if I'm on a camping trip or something, the power of, a good warm beanie, to a hood, a couple different hoods, a wind layer hood, to the buff that's up on my head. There's a lot of different uses for those different,
right.
Yeah, different.
I actually don't buy jackets or even vests now without hoods on them. I learned the hard way that if I did that, I wanted a hood and I didn't have one. Because I'd rather have it back there and not have it on than have a jacket without a hood and be like, where is it?
Yeah, totally.
You
It
know?
can get a little
I don't
crazy.
think, why do you even sell that?
Yeah.
You know?
It can get crazy with hoods. Like I've had I got 6 hoods in there,
Yeah.
Yeah. Which one am I grabbing?
Where is Mollie?
Yeah.
She's under 6
Yeah.
hoods and her ski helmet, you know?
Yeah.
That's a thing. And I mean, on that subject, like they do make the hoods to go over ski helmets often. Although I find that that's like at some point no longer true. If you have the ski helmet and 3 hoods on already, the 4th may not go on top of it.
Yeah.
That's sad, but it's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Kids, kids are like they're just mini adults, but, so everything we've talked about can apply to a child as well. Is there any special consideration?
Yeah, so kids, very similar, just a smaller version, and they may not be able to express their emotions depending on how old they are in terms of like, hey, I'm cold. They might just be crying, right? And I think that same ideas, those good layers and layering, and also I've seen those like onesies that are waterproof that people put their kids in. Those seem to be pretty amazing. Just like throw them in a bunch of layers and then throw that on top, and they'll probably be good for a while. But kids are also pretty resilient. Like I'm thinking of friends in Denali, one couple in particular who their first child, he slept outside year round in his stroller for I think it was like the first year. Like it would be below 0. They put him out there, put a bunch of blankets on him. Like, they checked on him. They weren't like, this is not harassment. I mean, he was totally comfortable and fine. And so I think that goes to show you that, well, first, kids are really resilient, and you're setting the tone as a parent, of course. But also, so much of this can be about mindset, and just getting used to getting outside at whatever those temperatures are in the winter. Those numbers they do mean something, but they are kind of relative, and you can do it with the right gear. And if you get cold, if you don't have the right gear, like moving will warm you up, or at least a little bit. It'll help. So, but I also don't have kids. I just want to say that I don't have any kids, so I just have nieces and nephews.
But you know kids, and being cold. I'm always baffled by how my children claim to not be cold. One, I'm like, how is that possible? How are you out there doing this and you're not cold right now? Surely you're lying. But at some point, you just have to take their word for it. And surely you'd complain if you were actually cold. And then the other thing is my son. My hands are always cold, as we've discussed in great detail. But they are like, no, Mom, my hands are fine. Leave me alone. Clearly we could talk about this for the rest of our lives. So let's not do that, because we both have other things to do, like go outside. Real fast, talk to us, because we just like to end all these episodes sort of the same way. What is your favorite gear? Like, what's your favorite thing?
My favorite gear, man, that's a tough one. So I mean, the gloves, I don't know if they're my favorite, but they're necessary, right? I think right now, and I think it changes based on which activities I'm doing, what season and whatnot, but the record for the past little while has been that windbreaker, like that nice thin windbreaker that is also breathable. I've been wearing that almost every day. And it's washable, so that's great.
Yeah. And I think we've just established your gloves are your most essential item.
Yeah, for sure. The quote unquote emergency mittens. They're needed gear.
Okay. And last but not least, if you were going to describe for us your favorite outdoor moment ever, just somewhere, like if you close your eyes and try to think of some, just that perfect moment, where are you and what are you doing?
Oh man, that's a toughie as well. I've had so many great moments, and really, really wild places that I feel like is a privilege to be able to experience. So maybe not just one moment, but like a trip that, for example, a ski trip up in the Arctic, my husband and I did 2 years ago. And it was just really spectacular, where we left this remote village in the Anaktuvik Pass and gates of the Arctic, and then skied to the road to Wiseman. And just that trip, it was something I was intimidated about, mostly because of the temperatures and mostly because of my hands. But I was able to do it, and we camped along the whole way, and we didn't see a single person, tons of wildlife sign, And that was just really, really special to me. Yeah, I'd say that was the standout trip of recent years.
Mollie, thank you for sharing your expertise with us and with this highly practical episode of the Humans Outside podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. It's a pleasure to talk with you and talk about all these things as we get ready for winter.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for other listeners to find the podcast too. It really does make a difference. Until next time, we'll see you out there.